and hello and welcome to AleksConnects Creative Sandbox. My name is Alex. I can show you Tony. I guess you saw it before. We getting back to streams. For now, since I am still sick, I don't know the reasons behind this. I'm going through I don't know how to properly say it in English. Through procedures to understand why exactly I'm sick, but while I'm doing so, I can't necessarily stream at a full capacity because I'm still kind of feeling not well. So until I will get well, we're going to stream without webcam, and we're going to go with streams a little bit shorter. So today's stream probably going to be 1 hour, 1.5 hour tops. So we finished working with simplification, and at least for now, and now we're basically switching to lighting. So I already kind of started to talk about lighting in a previous stream in Russian, so what I'm going to do today is just basically it's going to cover exactly all things that we talked about in Russian streams, but in English relatively quickly, and then we will try to, during this stream, come up with a simplified instruments how to actually deal with lighting. I mean, in terms of the how to view lighting in terms of the types of light, and we will try to create our own simplification around it. So let's just check the sound, and without further ado, let's just start. Let's just check the sound, and okay, sound works good. So let's just go. So again, I decided to pause simplification for sole purpose of the practical confusion. I mean, theoretically, we kind of established a lot, especially in English streams, about simplification. We talked about it a lot. We figured out how exactly to work with simplification and how we need to approach it in the future, but it was still unclear how exactly we need to attack simplification on a practical level. Or not simplification, but free visualization. I'm completely mixing things up. Yeah, free visualization. So we worked on free visualization before, we finished with simplification, and free visualization was something that I truly wanted to make kind of clear for myself, but it wasn't successful, so for now we paused on free visualization, and we will work with free visualization using simplification, not using design, body language, shape, and form. Instead, we're going to work on the simplification. So okay, let's just go. Again, I'm not feeling super well today either, but hopefully I will set my brain into a working thing. Okay, so let's just switch to lighting. So we started lighting. So one of the main things that we're going to discuss when we're going to talk about lighting is the storytelling capacity of lighting. So basically, every time that we're going to talk about lighting, we're not necessarily going to talk about how exactly create an illusion of with lighting. So let's just show you a quick example of what I'm talking about. Let me see. Okay, here. So before that, we talked about lighting from the standpoint of fundamentals. Still, we established our basic fundamentals of lighting, like form properties, value control, form and shape control. We talked about overall properties of lighting that will help us to create an illusion of reality, which is again working on highlights. Basically, this is kind of the separate parts of lighting that makes things realistic in certain conditions. Highlights, light side, halftone, terminator, in hard kind of surfaces, on soft surfaces it's going to be just a core shadow, form shadow, casting shadow or drop shadow, ambient, occlusion, or basically ambient light, which basically separates into two, reflected or bounced light, and occlusions. We kind of, again, if you want this information, just revisit a theoretical stream about the fundamentals, which is available on YouTube, Alex Tabletops. And we're not going to focus necessarily on this type of analysis of lighting. We're more going to focus on these type of things. Basically, we're going to think about direct and indirect light. We're going to think about artificial and natural lights, and we're going to separate them in certain type of categories. So basically today we're going to do exactly that. But before that, we're going to establish the instruments to work with lighting that will help us to tell stories with lighting, not necessarily create an illusion of reality, which is the purpose of this fundamental skill. Just basically understand lighting, how it works, understand lighting in perspective, and understand how to control the form. This is something that will help you to create an illusion of reality. Basic analysis of lighting, and basically understanding how to apply this lighting in perspective, and then using full control of light properties or form properties in order to create an illusion of lighting. So we're not necessarily going to focus on that like super complex thing. We're going to work on simplified lighting, I would say, for the purposes of storytelling. And in order to work with lighting for the purposes of storytelling, we're going to view lighting from the standpoint of the mood. So mood is going to be one of the most important things for us when it comes down to working with lighting. And the reason for that is because mood and understanding the mood for our illustration is going to give us value range and color harmony. It's basically going to give us all needed information, what type of value range we want to choose, and what type of color we're actually going to work with, which is pretty awesome because usually we're not necessarily clear what type of colors we want to use in our work. Sometimes we're basically choosing colors based on the type of subjects that we're working with. So for instance, when I worked with Angry Birds, I knew that these characters, like red is red, like this guy, I forgot what his name, Chuck, is basically yellow. I knew that this crazy guy, forgot the name again, is orange, this one is black, etc. So I knew their colors, and sometimes this information is already exists, but it's not necessarily a good way to choose the colors for your work. Ideal way to work with colors is to basically understand the mood that you want to portray through the illustration, and based on that you're going to use colors. So I showed this example in a previous stream. I'm going to use the same example today. So let me open Pinterest, and I want to show you in Pinterest what I'm talking about when I'm talking about the mood part of the lighting. So okay, so here's my Pinterest when I'm basically gathering all information to inspire or as references, and I created a specific board power of lighting, which basically kind of shows this thing. So when we're working with mood, when we're using mood for the purposes of storytelling, we're not necessarily using the actual colors of the things that we're working with. So for instance, if we're going to look at this rock or mountain, I don't know what it actually is, in each illustration it has a different color. So for instance, like, and this color basically supports the mood of the certain illustration. So we're not necessarily choosing colors based on subjects that we're working with, but instead we're choosing colors based on the mood that we want to portray. So in this illustration, for instance, we have a horse that color of this horse is white because it creates a good contrast with the lighting. Now, this horse on this illustration is brown because it's created specifically to create this kind of contrast for this specific mood. Right here, the horse doesn't have a color at all. It's mostly red and different shades of red, like a dark brown. In this illustration, horse probably going to be a pinkish color, or not necessarily pinkish. It's going to basically pick up the colors from the ground and from the overall setting. So basically this is the way that we're going to work with colors. We're not going to create colors from the standpoint of what colors of subjects, what color subjects are, instead of asking this questions, we're going to ask ourselves the question, what mood we want to portray. And if we're going to portray a super interesting, like super fun and interesting mood, we're probably going to lean towards something on a warm spectrum. If we want to create something like maybe depressing or cold, we're going to move towards something cool on a color spectrum, and etc. So again, mood is going to not only give us information about the value range that we're going to work with, so the basic overall contrast, so how many dark values we're going to choose, how many light values we're going to choose, are we going to choose full range of values, or we're going to use a limited range, etc. So mood is going to give us so many information that it's just basically crazy. So overall value range and color harmony, this is the purpose of asking this question about the mood, and I guess this is the proper approach how to attack lighting. Now from the standpoint of, okay, I need to create a super perfect render of the lighting. Ideally, it's always a good idea to practice it separately, understanding how to create an illusion of lighting and basically illusion of form. But once you will set this information in your brain and you will feel comfortable about how to work with it, then it's a pretty good idea to move to the next level and now think about lighting from this standpoint of the mood, because this is exactly the thing that will help you to tell stories with lighting and not just use it to create a super pretty render. So, and this is the way that we're going to think about lighting from now on. So again, mood is the first question that you need to answer, and again, it gives us value range and color harmony. So let's just move on to the next one. The next thing is we need to ask ourselves about spatial limitations, which basically works within overall space that we're creating illustration. So for instance, spatial limitations for this is going to be a closed room with opened gate, with holes in a ceiling that basically creates the spotlight. So we're going to think about overall surroundings that basically surrounds our illustration, not necessarily inside the actual picture plane, but overall, like we're going to think even outside of the picture plane. So we will try to think about I don't know, overall environment in which this illustration is set, and spatial limitations will help us to with basically overall light source placements. So it's definitely going to give us the understanding where exactly the light sources are going to be placed. So again, knowing that we have walls right here, we know that if we're not going to create any windows, that means that light is not going to probably penetrate those walls, so they're going to basically reflect it, or basically close, I don't know, restrict the light from hitting them, and etc. So we're going to search for light sources in a little bit different way based on spatial limitations. So again, if we're going to create an open environment, then we're going to use probably natural light sources. If we're going to work with, of course, indoors, so again, for outdoors, we're going to work with natural sources. Of course, there are exceptions, but still. And for indoors, we're going to work with artificial light sources, and sometimes use natural environment, such as, for instance, this open gate is going to create kind of a natural light source from the artificial opening, which is kind of the way that windows are working. They're providing us with non-artificial light, basically natural light, but since it's, I don't know, shines through window, it kind of will be perceived as artificial. This is something we're going to talk about after we're going to finish the overall overview about how to attack lighting. So again, spatial limitations, this is just something that will help us with overall light source placement. And we're going to talk how exactly it's going to connect it to visibility in a bit. So the next thing is the type of lights. So basically, again, light sources in most cases, and its availability. So we need to ask ourselves a question about what type of light we're working with. It's basically, is this an artificial light, or is this a natural light? So again, if it's going to be a natural light, it's going to work one way. If it's going to be an artificial light, it's going to work a little bit different. And again, we're going to talk about what types of lighting, light sources we're going to create categories for in a bit. And again, understanding the types of lighting and its availability will basically helps us with choosing a proper light source intensity. So again, if it's going to be an artificial light, we're going to choose a pretty limited intensity, because most of the artificial lights not that intense at all. The most intense light, of course, is the sun and like overall atmosphere, so the natural lights are the most kind of intense. But again, understanding what type of light sources we're working with would definitely will help us with intensity, and intensity a little bit later will help us with understanding the dominant light source, which is something we're going to get to. So and availability of the light source, it's most like it's kind of a physical thing. We need to understand what type of light sources are available in a certain I don't know, settings or conditions or genres. So for instance, if we're going to create a sci-fi setting, we need to understand what type of light sources will be available in the sci-fi setting. What type of light sources will be available, like realistically available, based on the time that this illustration is transpiring. So for instance, if it's going to be like, I don't know, Midwest, there's probably not going to be any artificial light, and there's going to be a lot of I forgot the names. Yeah, my brain is not working when I'm sick, so sorry about that. So again, it's basically something that will help us to understand again the overall intensity, and we will get to it. And availability of the lights is just something that we need to think about, like logic. Again, we need to understand if this light is going to be available at all. So for instance, if we're going to create a sun as a main source for this illustration, but this sun is not going to be available for this particular illustration because it's indoors, we need to create a logical explanation how sun is going to be a dominant light source if everything is basically indoors. So that means that we're probably going to add a lot of windows and make sure that sun is going to go through those windows and create a certain type of lighting for us. So again, it's more like a logical thing. We're going to talk about availability and practical implications, and it's going to be a little bit more clear. But for now, like theoretically, hopefully it's understandable. But if it's not, so sorry about that. I will try to get my point across a little bit later once we will get to practice. So again, types of light sources. This is something, by the way, that we're going to work with today. So visibility of light is basically the next question that we need to ask ourselves, and it's tied to spatial limitations. So visibility of light sources is basically something that helps us with canvas light placement, or light source placement inside of the canvas. So again, when we worked with spatial limitations, this is something that works outside of the canvas. So again, we're trying to understand how to place light sources even outside of the canvas. So if we're going to have a fire placed in this area outside of the picture plane, we still need to think where exactly it needs to be placed. When we're talking about visibility of light sources, this is basically something that helps us with understanding what type of light source is going to be visible in our picture plane and what compositional purpose this light is going to play. So for instance, if we're going to choose a visible light source in this area, and it's going to be truly visible in this illustration, it doesn't have to distract viewers' attention from the focus. So our main focus is always going to be somewhere where the main action is happening, and sometimes placing visible depiction of the light source inside of the picture plane, not a good idea, because now it's going to attract viewer to this light, which is not something that we need compositionally. So because of this, in most cases, what we're going to do is we're going to think about visibility of these lights and where exactly to place them from the standpoint of composition. So in order not to ruin composition, we need to place them properly. So for instance, that, like, if I don't want to create a fire that will distract attention from the main focus, I have multiple kind of choices how I could do this. I could create like barely visible fire. I could create a certain contrast for the fire that will basically make sure that it's not going to be destructive, or create a values for the main focus that will be much stronger than the value of the fire. So again, working with contrasts, making sure that the main focus is always going to attract attention towards our focus, or towards our high point of the contrast, or low point depending on overall conditions. So again, the visibility of light is more like just a visual thing, and it's going to work inside of the canvas. So this is something that basically works only inside of the picture plane. So again, I talked about like this. So for instance, we're not seeing what creates this spotlight, but we know that the light actually placed in here. So that means that its visibility is basically the overall light source is not visible. Only the effect of this light source is visible. But the light source itself is not visible. The same goes, for instance, for this thing. So this, if we're going to look at this gate way, I don't know how to properly say it, so basically like a opened door, as a light source, which means that this light source is actually visible. So as light source is going to be visible and is going to like spread lighting from this area. So this is basically a visible light source. This could be a potentially visible light source, but when it comes down to the hole in a ceiling that basically creates the spotlight, this is something that's going to be invisible inside of the picture plane. Although this is still something that we need to consider on the stage of spatial limitations, in order to understand light placements outside of the picture plane. So again, just to understand that every time that we're working with placement of lights inside of our scene, we need to think about those lights outside of the picture plane, which is again spatial limitations will come to help, and about their visibility inside of the picture plane. So this is the way that they're connected. And the last connection is types of lighting and their availability, with how many light sources we actually have. Usually, as I said before, we're not going to have just one light source. Usually we're going to have at least like 2-3 light sources. This is the most common practice for artists of any kind, to create 3-point lighting and something like this. So since in most cases we're going to create more than 1-point lighting, which is a possibility too, because if we will create just one light source, the rest lighting is going to be created by reflected light, and reflected light is going to become our additional lighting. But since it's not necessarily going to emit light, because every time that every time that I'm talking about light sources, I'm considering light sources that will actually emit light, not something that will I don't know, just bounce light. So we're not taking into consideration bounce light when we're talking about light sources necessarily, because again, it's just going to create a lot of confusion. We're going to think about light sources only about light sources that will actually emit light, something that will again shine light on surrounding subjects. And sometimes it's going to be tricky. So for instance, with this door, the door itself, it's not necessarily a light source. The light source is the sun and the atmosphere that basically shines the light outdoors. But since this is indoors and this basically a space through which light rays will hit whatever is inside, it basically will behave as light source. So it's kind of a tricky thing. So either way, okay. And how many light sources? This is basically a question that basically comes with logic. So when you start to list that types of light, you're definitely going to think about how many light sources you have, because since we asking ourselves a question about the intensity of each light, we need to make sure that each light is going to have a different intensity, because if we're going to create all lights with a similar intensity, it's just going to overpower each other. It's going to create a pretty bad contrast. So for instance, right here we have a pretty similar lighting conditions for everything. So it seems like this light is hitting almost everything. There's light on top of it, so basically it's too light. There's almost no contrast in here. But right here we created a dominant light source, which basically illuminates the focus area, and the rest is just going to be like, this is going to be an additional light source, like secondary light source. So again, the primary light source, secondary light source, tertiary light sources, and etc. And to answer those questions, it's basically goes with the question how many light sources we have, and understanding what light source is going to be the most dominant one, which will illuminate our focus in order to attract the viewer's attention to a certain area. So again, how many light sources is going to be completely connected to the types of light, because again, it works with intensity and it works with the dominant light source. The most intense light source is going to be usually most dominant. So I guess this is all about talking about this thing. I guess let's just move on to the next thing. Hopefully it's clear. And again, we're going to get to it on multiple occasions. We're going to use this scheme every time that we're going to work on our own, on recreating our own lighting conditions in practice. So we're going to, first questions that we're always going to ask ourselves is what mood this work has, basically this illustration or supposed illustration has. So this will give us light value range. It will give us a supposed color harmony, at least a start for it. Certain range for colors. We're going to ask ourselves about spatial limitations, which again will help us with overall light source placement. Additional light source placement will come to us with visibility, which will help us to place light sources inside of the canvas. Then types of lights and their availability is going to help us with choosing a proper light intensity, light source intensity. And in order to choose a proper light source intensity, we need to understand how many light sources we have and what type of light source is the most dominant one. And that way we're basically going to create a primary light source, the secondary light source, and of course tertiary and additional light sources. So for instance, one of the reasons why I stopped working on Angry Birds vs Transformers for now, I will continue them at some point, but one of the reasons why I stopped working on it or pause it, because I understood the overall complexity of the light sources in here. Like I have one light source in here, one light source in here, another light source in here, another one right here. So and the funny thing, these are the additional light sources, or maybe even tertiary, I don't know. So we have secondary light source in here, we have primary light source on top, we have additional light sources right here, which are kind of LED lights. It's as the shining and glowing eyes for the Transformers. They're not going to necessarily illuminate that many light. It's going to be restricted in the area of their face, but still, it's still a light source, and it still will create certain effect on surroundings. So again, the fire is going to create a certain effect on surroundings, like burning piles and etc. So again, I created so many light sources right here that my brain is just basically exploded, and in order to control all those light sources and understand how exactly they're going to work with each other. It's basically quite complex thing. So because of this, I decided, okay, we need to stop. We need to, like, I don't know, lower the bar, set the bar a little bit lower, and not work on too complicated stuff, because the more complex scene you have, the more complex analysis you had to go through when it comes down to the lighting, especially for me, because I'm using lighting for the storytelling purposes. And if I would just create a lighting like based on appeal, I wouldn't think about it necessarily. It would be much faster. But since my focus always is on storytelling, every time that I'm creating everything, like, the storytelling is the most important thing for me, and because of this, I'm basically making my job much harder when it comes down to working even with lighting. So, and basically I overcomplicated this thing for myself personally. So yeah, my voice is kind of dying, so let's just move forward and go to the figuring out how we're going to approach light sources. So so in here, in our fundamentals of art notes that we established earlier on our first streams, that again are available on YouTube at AleksConnects. So we talked about form from the standpoint of how light works. So this is something that we need to basically work on now in order to control how exactly we're going to choose the light source, how exactly we would choose the intensity of the light source, what type of light we're actually going to choose for each condition. We need to create some type of a controlled way of understanding how to work with it. So I guess the first thing that we right away are going to establish is the two types of surroundings. So natural is going to be our first type of surrounding, and of course, oh no, let's just go with outdoors. Hopefully I'm spelling things right. If not, I'm going to check it. Outdoors and indoors. So basically inside and outside. Okay, let me check. Outdoors, indoors. Seriously? And outdoors. Oh, by the way, I completely forgot to change this thing. We're actually streaming in English, and yeah. So, in terms of the in terms of the space in which we're going to create lighting, we're going to think about indoors and outdoors. All of these things are going to be our differentiation, like instruments of differentiation. So it will help us to understand what we're working with. So outdoors, indoors, this is the first two things when it comes down to the, I don't know, the environment. Let's just create like environment. I know that environment is a pretty complex word. Probably not going to spell it right from the get-go. Environment. Oh, come on. Yeah, environment is a pretty complex word for non-native speakers. So yeah, I probably spelled it wrong. So let's just check. Environment. Yep. Without I. Just environment. Almost right. So environment, in terms of the environment, we're going to have two. We're going to have outdoors and indoors. Okay, so the next thing is types of lighting now. Okay, where is it? So So types of lighting. Types, let's just call them LS types, light source types. Light source types. We're going to talk about general types for now, because there's going to be a lot of kind of subtypes. But for now, let's just establish a pretty simple way of controlling a general types of lighting, or of light sources. So light sources types, we're going to again separate them into two. For now, there's going to be natural and artificial. So natural going to be closer to outdoors usually, which is again not necessarily 100% true. If we're going to, for instance, create a scene during the night, when there's a lot of clouds and moon is not going to create that many light, we're going to depend on artificial light sources. But again, there's always an exception to the rules. But still, we need to kind of create a general explanation. So natural. So natural light sources, and we're going to kind of list them relatively quickly in a bit. So natural light sources and artificial. 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 Okay, so again, natural light sources, this is something that basically works like with nature, even like bioluminescence. This is basically something that applies to a natural light, but it's quite complicated type of lighting, which not commonly used at all, but still natural. This is everything that basically works with, like, creates naturally in the nature, and artificial is basically something made by human or adapted with human. I'm actually not sure if fire is going to be a natural light source or artificial light source, because again, there is a way to create fire artificially, and usually it's created artificially. But since, like, overall, if we're going to think about fire, like, which will be created from the sun, with certain conditions, by overheating and etc., and through the lenses, and so there is a way to create fire, of course, naturally, not necessarily artificially. So, but again, this is something that we need to come up with in the future. What type of lights, subtypes, actually applied to which category, and I guess this is something that we'll figure out with experience. Because of this, again, I don't want to create like too many things. Like, for us, thinking about natural and artificial lights is usually more than enough, because it's going to give us a lot of kind of answers already. So, and let's think what else we need. So again, we have an environment, so we're going to work with outdoors and we're going to work with indoors. So outdoors and indoors, it's basically something that works with spatial limitations. So every time we'll be thinking about spatial limitations, this is something that works basically like with information, what environment surrounds us outdoors, which is, again, it could be an empty space, it could be a like deep forest, which is again outdoors, but still, since there's a lot of trees, it's going to create a like spatial limitations for lighting to pass through the trees and leaves and etc. So indoors, kind of the same. It could be a closed space, completely closed space, with a small beam of light shining through this closed space and creating an interesting like this type of effect. Completely forgot how it's called. Come on. Spotlight effect. Or it could be a opened room but still kind of indoors, but with a lot of light shining through the windows and like reflecting from the ceilings and etc. For instance, if we have a big window, or without windows, just like a like wall from the glass, I don't know. So again, there's a lot of types of like environment conditions that we could set in, but mostly we're going to think about outdoors and indoors, and I guess it's going to be enough. The rest is just going to be like a the type of outdoors and the type of indoors and etc. The same goes with lights, with the types of light. Types of light, again, this is something we're going to ask ourselves right here. Again, availability, this is something that is going to be just by logic. We're not going to create any type of categories for it, just logical understanding. Is this type of lighting like realistically available for this certain condition that we're working with? Or it's completely unrealistic to see a sun placed inside of the freaking room. I mean, you're not going to create a sun inside of the closed space, of course. It's just unrealistic unless you're working within a certain type of fantasy. So, I mean, it's just a logic when it comes down with the availability. So, yeah. And we're going to just create two categories, artificial and natural light. So let's just now create a visual representation. So we don't need to create a visual representation for outdoors and indoors. It's pretty close. Outdoors usually doesn't have anything man-built. It's just a lot of nature surrounding outdoors. Not necessarily. It could be a lot of man-built like buildings and etc. But in most cases, this is something outside of an open space, or basically in an open space, basically outdoors. Indoors, again, this is something that is going to be inside of certain construction, certain like car, inside of the car, and etc. So basically inside of a certain type of, I don't know, room, bunker, whatever you could find yourselves in inside. So for them, we don't need to create a visual representation. It's going to be visually clear. If it's going to, like for instance, this one, it's clear that it's inside because we have ceiling, we have walls, we have floor. If it would be outside, we would see the ground, maybe a lot of trees, maybe some buildings, and a lot of sky, clouds, and etc. So we don't need to create a visual representation for it, but we definitely need to create a visual representation to work with natural and artificial light. So let's just establish them. I guess we're going to use the same representation as we chose right here. It's going to be basically sun. It's going to be an atmospheric light, which is going to be two natural lights, and two artificial lights, which is probably going to be more than two. Is going to be our point light and spotlight, and we're actually going to create a additional type of light, maybe, we'll see. So let's just think about this. So because they're going to behave quite differently. So sun is going to be a direct light, and spotlight usually is going to be a direct light. Point light is going to be a indirect light. It's going to shine in multiple directions. The same goes with atmosphere. Atmosphere ideally like hits in multiple directions from everywhere. So like this type of simplification could work, but it seems kind of too limited. Maybe we need to add another one. Let's just see. So let's just go. So first, natural light. Basically going to be an atmosphere. I don't know how to actually properly place them. We don't have that much space right here. So again, first type of natural light is going to be an atmosphere. No, let's just go with sun. And moon, not just sun. Moon probably going to work right here too. sun and moon. These are going to be our natural direct light. Natural indirect light is going to be an atmosphere. And two artificial lights. For now there's going to be two, there's probably going to be more than two. Or there is a way to actually create a third category, something between natural and artificial. So because again, for instance, doors and windows, this is something that could basically, it's created from artificial thing integrated with natural thing. So natural light shines through artificial doors and windows and etc. So this is kind of something that we could create separately, like a third type, which is actually quite interesting concept. So again, sun, moon, atmosphere. So again, sun and moon is going to be represented like this. Moon is going to be represented quite similar, but it's going to be a moon. Moon is going to be relatively weak visually. It's not going to shine that bright. It's never going to shine that bright as the sun. But we'll work on their visual representation better a little bit later, but for now we're going to create some type of a visual. So we're going to consider these types of light as direct light. In order to understand how this light basically behaves, so since moon and sun are placed pretty far away, their intensity are going to be, again, different. Sun is going to be the most intense, moon is not going to be that intense, but the overall types of light that they're going to emit is going to be direct. So it's going to basically shine in a direct rays. So the overall direction is basically going to be direct, one way. Atmosphere, it's quite a complex subject. So usually atmosphere is going to look something like this. So there's going to be kind of a orb, which basically shines light inside and from multiple directions. So again, we're going to work on a visual representation, on a little bit better visual representation a little bit later, but for now let's just assume that it's going to look like this. Basically shines from multiple directions, which means that it's indirect. Indirect. Hopefully I'm spelling things right. Let's just check them. Okay, so indirect. Yep. Also, usually when we talk about indirect light, there is a kind of a rule that most indirect lights are weaker than direct lights. Most of the direct lights are much stronger in terms of the intensity, but like, in order not to confuse ourselves, let's just not going to use this information yet. Why would you say that then? I don't know. So let's just think about this. So again, indirect light again is going to be kind of all over the place, so it's not going to go just in one direction. It's going to hit subject from multiple sides. So the best example probably going to work with a sphere, maybe. So like, imagine that sun or moon is going to hit something, and when it hits something, it basically creates a direct projection of the shadow like this. So it's actually kind of a direct projection. It's not going to like project in an angle. No, let's just not going to choose a sphere. Let's just choose a cube. It's going to be a little bit much easier to represent it with the cube, maybe. No, it's actually much easier with the sphere. Because sphere needs only 2 projections. So there's a terminator. Direct light is going to hit terminator and project a shadow from the terminator. It's going to be quite a big shadow, I guess, right here. Yeah, we're not going to create any type of rendering right here. So yeah, so direct light is basically hits from one direction and works like this. Indirect light is going to work a little bit differently. So it's actually going to create a kind of a small shadow right here because it's going to hit from multiple angles. So again, it's more like an area light. So it will create a small shadow in this area, like for the subject, but in most cases it's going to be a lot of soft shadows. This is the thing about indirect light, because it hits from multiple kind of sides. There's not going to be any distinguished areas of light and shadow. It's always going to be kind of everything in between. And there's going to be a small shadow maybe right here. Just establish the ground, because we don't have any shadows, and because of this, like, there's no custom shadows right here. And also let's just recreate ground right here too. Okay, we kind of need to get closer to the finish. We have like maximum 30 minutes till the end of the stream. Hopefully I will be able to finish. So again, indirect light in this particular instance is going to shine from multiple directions, and because it's going to shine from multiple directions, most of the shadows will basically project truly from multiple directions. It's not going to be any distinguished terminator. Light is going to hit from multiple kind of sides because it's indirect, and because this is a freaking atmosphere. So yeah, so no distinct shadows. It's pretty questionable how Moon is going to work, because I doubt that Moon itself actually will create a strong shadows. It's questionable. This is something that we need to kind of study, I guess, in order to set this into a category of the direct light, because again, Moon is relatively like, it's not strong enough to create like distinct shadows. And I guess this kind of will mix up with the atmosphere some way, and will maybe transform more into atmospheric light because of its low intensity. But when there is a full moon, Moon could actually probably in certain conditions could create something like this, like a strong shadow. Because it's night, this shadow is probably not going to be visible that much, but it's probably still will be there, like logically and scientifically. But it's not going to be visible, which is an interesting situation, because when something is visible, that means that it's exists. If something is we cannot see, that means that it's probably not exists, because I don't know, it's something that kind of weird. So Moon is definitely going to be for now. It's a kind of a question, so let's just kind of set a question right here for the Moon. So So yeah, this is the way that we're going to work with natural sources, and I guess for now this is just more than enough. It's just 2 of them for now. Yep. Let's just go to the artificial. So artificial light sources, we're going to have spotlights, which is going to be our direct light. Which is kind of a weird thing about the spotlight, though. I wouldn't say that spotlight is actually kind of a direct light, but again, it all depends how exactly you will perceive a direct light. If you're going to think about direct light, that's something that basically shines at a straight curve, like in parallels. This is not necessarily what direct light means. I guess direct light is just light that basically creates strong shadows, and indirect light, it's something that creates weak shadows and barely visible shadows. So let's just think about the direct and indirect light exactly that way. So again, direct light, this is something that creates a strong shadow, something that basically actually creates a visible shadow. And indirect light, this is usually something that creates barely visible shadow, like under the subject that we're working with. It's still going to be visible, but not that strong enough, strong at all. So there's 2 of them. So there's going to be a point light. No, point light is going to be closer to the atmospheric light. It's going to behave relatively similar, although different, but similar. Point. In Russian is going to be a точечный свет. So this is basically something that is going to shine like this. So there's going to be a point, and this point is going to emit light from multiple directions. It kind of actually works like a sun. Like, it's going to visually look like a sun, but it's not a sun, because again, sun looks like this, like visually, but in reality, sun hits light rays directly because it's too far away. Because of this, it's a direct light. But with the point light, since it's visible and we're actually relatively close to it, first, the intensity of the point lights usually are relatively weak, and the light that it shines basically illuminates everything around it. So it actually works more like an indirect light than like direct light. Let's just duplicate this one right here. And again, the only difference is going to be in how this light is actually going to shine. Because now these red lights are going to shine this way. So it will create in some places maybe like shadows, but they're not going to be strong enough. They're not going to be as strong as for direct light. But again, it all depends on what type of lighting we're working with. This is kind of a problem here. This is something that we need to figure out with practice, I guess. Because depending on where exactly we're going to place this light, if we're going to place it on top, it's going to actually work relatively similar. It's going to create a little bit bigger shadow, but it's still not going to be super visible at all. So it's not going to be that visible as the direct light shadow. But again, depending on certain conditions. Because this light is super weak, again, all depends on conditions. So let's just move on. So the second artificial light is going to be a spotlight. Come on. Spot. Let's just call it just a spotlight. No, it's actually called spotlight. So spotlight is basically something that shine something like this. Usually it's going to be stronger, and although it doesn't have like super direct like straight direction, kind of spread out, but still it's probably going to behave more like a direct light, because it's going to create much stronger shadow. Again, once we will put everything right here into practice, we will just like explain them a little bit better. But for now, let's just go with whatever we have. So again, the difference with the spotlights is just going to be, I guess, in the direction. So now direction is going to be a little bit more directional. I mean, there's not going to be straight parallel lines. They're going to be quite distant, which means that the overall shadow is going to be just bigger. But it's not going to change the overall fact that the shadow is still going to be quite big, or quite distinct. So yeah, the shadow is still going to be distinct, but it's not going to, the rays of light is going to be a little bit, I don't know, tilted. I don't know how to properly say it in English. I don't know. My brain is not working. Spread out. Not just direct as we would think about light. So again, it all depends how far we're going to place the spotlight. The further the spotlight are or is, the probably, I don't know, kind of something that we need to check. Maybe we were going to create a scene in Blender in 3D, and we will try to emulate all these light sources in order to explain them and understand them a little bit better. We're going to increase their intensity and think about this. So this is something that we need to go through practice in order, through examples, in order to actually figure out if it's going to work or not. It's pretty bad we don't have place for a third category and the last category, unfortunately, which is something in between natural and artificial light. It's kind of a shame. Okay, let's get rid of this illustration. We don't need it right here. We also don't need the light sources, and instead let's just create more space for our information. Because in the end we're not working with line art, we're working with lighting, so yeah. So environment, outdoors, indoors, this is kind of a first important thing. The next thing is going to be a light source types. So the types of the light sources, and there's going to be three categories. There's going to be natural, artificial, and let's call them in between for now. I don't know how to properly kind of name them. I don't remember how exactly it actually reads. Okay. Between, I guess, double E only in a second. Yep, exactly. So in between. So in between, how many in-betweens we're going to have? The in-between lights, it's usually windows. Basically shape-oriented light sources. Something that basically shines through the shape. Like for instance, Maybe it's better to actually call them shape lighting. Some of them still will be artificial. Let's just not call them in-betweens. Let's just call them shape. Shape-based for now. Let's just call them shape-based. So shape-based lighting is basically something that has a certain type of shape, and based on the look of the shape is going to emit lighting in the way that the shape is designed. So it could be natural, it could be artificial, but actually creating a separate category kind of simplifies things, because we're going to have two of them right here, two of them right here, and we're going to create like the shape based right here, which could be kind of variable based on multiple types of shapes. So shape based. Okay, so shape based. Let's just create two categories. Let's just try to create names for them. So shape based. So windows and doors, which something that we could call them by one big name. Let's just figure out what type of name we could call them. There is a word in Russian that actually explains windows and doors as one big thing, but I don't remember it, so yeah, let's just for now create doors / windows. Let's just call them like this. And by doors I mean not like the closed doors, but again open doors. So kind of open spaces. Let's just establish an open door right here, because the door itself not emit lighting, doesn't emit light at all. But again, like if I will consider this one as the door, and it's going to be an opened one, it's going to emit lighting. So this is exactly what I'm talking about. Open door. And of course windows, usually windows are kind of transparent, so because of this they will emit light. So this is one shape based thing, and the second shape based thing we need to think about. Let's think. So another shape based type of lighting we could think about. So again, windows for I established window as something that basically works as a restricted atmosphere. So it still kind of emits light as an atmosphere indirectly, which means that it's probably going to set right here. Although it all depends. The problem with the window though, and with that open door, depending on what type of outdoor or indoor these type of slidings could become indirect or direct. So this is something that's not going to be easy to distinguished as the direct or indirect right here, like right here. Let's just leave it open for changes for now. So again, shape-based doors, windows, like open doors, windows. What else? There's a third one. Let's see. Yep. Lamps. Fluorescent lamps, I guess. This is something that we could think about as a third type of light source. Or a second one, I mean, right here. There's a lot of text right here. Fluorescent lamps. Usually they have a pretty distinguished shape, and the shape basically shines relatively different. So windows are going to be like this, and the doors are usually going to go like this. Again, it's just all about the shape. And of course, windows could have a completely different shapes, because based on the window design, shape could emit completely different type of light and emit light a little bit differently. But like overall, something to think about, because maybe light conditions will, like the way that light is going to emit itself is going to be quite different. So again, the reason why I decided to create a separate category for the light source from natural and artificial, because again, you could think about the door space, like the frame through which light shines, as something that creates artificially, but the overall natural light that goes through the door inside the room, for instance, it's going to be natural. So it's kind of an in-between thing. So in order to not confuse it with natural and artificial, it's better to create just shape-based category that's not necessarily natural, not necessarily artificial. It's just something in between. So fluorescent lamps, it's quite a questionable how exactly they're going to emit light, because they will emit light relatively interesting. I mean, it's actually kind of like an indirect light, because it's much closer to an artificial behavior. Again, it's not necessarily emits light the same as the point light, although we could think about this one as a point light. But again, it usually shines light in a pretty like big area. So fluorescent light actually kind of, at least I tend to view it as just a small kind of window that shines light from itself. But we need to kind of still create categories for them to work with. So again, for now this is a questionable, just fluorescent lamps. It seems like a weird thing. Lamps? What? Forget the P. Lamps. Lamps. Okay, so we have about 15 minutes till the end of the stream, so let's just wrap up overall understanding and like try to think how exactly we're going to use it. So again, the idea behind those things, we're going to work on the shape-based category, because it's kind of a new category that I just created. I don't know if it's actually will stay or will go. It seems like a logical separation from artificial and natural lights, but this is still something that we need to consider. So because the behavior of those are going to be relatively different, because again, doors, yes, they will create more like a direct light, I guess. The same could go for the windows. In a certain kind of conditions, window actually is going to behave more like a direct light. But again, it's quite questionable thing, because, for instance, in this instance, light shines quite indirectly, so it goes in all sides. But again, it all depends. No, it's actually not. It's actually going to work more like a direct light, because again, if we're going to think about what type of light is actually shining through this window or through this door, if it's going to be a light from outdoors, then it's going to shine here, and it's not going to illuminate the ceiling. Ceiling is going to be illuminated by the bounced light from the top and bounced light from the ground, which will be picked up from the atmosphere. So again, now you see that there's much complexity when it comes down to the shape-based lightings, and it all depends what type of lighting is actually hitting through this door, through this window, which is kind of a problem. But in general, let's just think about them as direct light, because I believe in most cases it's actually going to pick up direct light pretty similar to the natural behavior of the sun and moon. And in some instances, maybe it's going to work like an atmosphere, but I doubt that. It's actually more like considered like a direct one. Although the funny thing is, in my notes there is a note that windows are actually work like an indirect light. Direct light is a spotlight. Even this is basically considered like a spotlight, like a direct light, which is interesting. Like in my notes, point line is considered like a direct light, which is interesting. This is again something to think about. This is a problem. I mean, when I created those notes, it was kind of a lot of years ago, and at that point in time, I thought about lighting in one way. Now I have a completely like different understanding of light, and because of this, like, I have quite interesting separation between like in understanding. So like logically it seems like sun has to create a direct. No, sun is definitely probably going to be a direct light. Let's think. I guess windows and doors will, in most cases, will behave like indirect light. Fluorescence lamps, it's just indirects too. So there's not that many direct lights, like in general. Like ideally, if we're going to think about how many direct lights are actually there, it's sun and it's spotlight. That's it. In this new understanding. But in old understanding, this one considered as the direct light too, such as fluorescence lamps, and the rest, atmosphere and doors and windows, are considered as indirect light. So again, this is exactly the reason why I don't want to create understanding about direct light and indirect light, because depending on conditions it's going to completely change. So maybe for now, good chance that we're not going to use direct and indirect explanations in order to not confuse ourselves, because again, depending on conditions, atmosphere could become direct light if it's going to go through the doors or windows in certain kind of situations. The same goes for the point light. Depending on its intensity, depending on its placement in space, it could be indirect or it could be direct. So because of this, I don't believe that it's a good idea to actually establish direct and indirect kind of things. And instead, let's just focus on overall understanding. So sun, atmosphere, spotlight, point light, doors and windows, fluorescent lamps, and just create a example how these rays of light potentially could affect subjects. And I guess this is going to be logically more than enough for us to understand how it's going to work. So instead of focusing on this thing with direct and indirect, which is basically just creates a lot of confusion, especially for me, like, I mean, it truly confuses me, like, the overall understanding what we need to call a direct light, what we need to call an indirect light. Because again, for me, it will change depending on circumstances and conditions. And because of this unpredictability, I don't want to set any type of things, like, unless I will go through the practice with it. And only then I will understand, okay, sun always direct, atmosphere always indirect, spotlight always direct, point light always indirect, or something like this. But if point light is going to behave itself indirectly or directly in multiple, like in different situations, then it's better to not use this understanding of direct and indirect light at all, because it's just going to create a lot of confusion. So yeah, I guess that's kind of closer to the end. I'm going to, like, try to think about shape-based designs a little bit better, try to understand how exactly they're going to work. So the last thing that we're going to do before ending the stream is create how door light and windows light and fluorescent light could potentially affect our subjects. So in most cases, I still kind of will consider windows and doors as something direct, because ideally they're going to create shadows, pretty distinct shadows maybe. If we're going to view them as something that works only, like, alone, the reason why door light and window light, like light that's going to shine through the windows and through opens kind of frame, probably not going to be considered in most cases as direct light, is because there's a lot of bounces from the ceiling, from the walls, that basically doesn't create a strong shadow. Because of this, we're not going to see a direct shadow, like distinct shadow. But in reality, I still believe that it actually has to create a strong shadow. But the shadow is just going to be much bigger, because the source is bigger. It's a pretty bad example, but again, I kind of want to finish on something, so again, let's just assume that light hits from the window or from the door, and basically creates this kind of elongated shadow for the sphere, potentially. So again, in most cases it's probably going to be more like a direct behavior, and fluorescent lamps are actually not necessarily creating a strong shadow, but again, it all depends where exactly they're going to be placed. But I actually don't believe that they will create a strong shadow. The shadow is going to be quite distorted. It's probably going to be more like this. And the difference with... By the way, this could be a good idea. Like, one of the reasons why I don't want to create, like, the rays of light, because it's quite hard to understand how exactly light is going to go through this. For instance, if door is going to be half opened, for instance, like if we're going to open the door only halfway, that means that light is going to behave a little bit more like a spotlight, which is the problem right here. It's going to shine rays from this area, open area, and illuminate only a certain area, and definitely will create a strong shadow. And will behave more like a direct light. So if it's going to be completely opened, and depending artificial or natural light is going to shine through it, is going to probably shine like this. But it's not going to go on top. So there's going to be a restricted ceiling. There's not going to be that much light emit from the door itself. Because again, light shines on the bottom and then reflects from it on the top, and from the walls to the top. So again, there's a lot of bounced lights which we're not going to consider. We're going to consider only something that kind of emits light. And if we're going to think about the door and the window as something that emits light, again, there's quite a complex thing. It all depends on what outside of this door and what outside of this window. Is it a light? Is it a natural source? Is it a sun only, or is it an atmosphere? Or is it a lot of bounced lights, which is again not something that emits light, but still. Is it a spotlight, or is it a point light? So again, because of this, I don't want to create visually any type of directionality here, because it's kind of a questionable. It depends, I would say, not questionable. It just depends. With fluorescent light, I still don't know. Like in most cases, it's probably not going to create that much of a direct shadow, but it's going to be much more visible probably than with a spotlight. But it's still not. It's still going to be quite soft. It's not going to be super visible, but it will be there. But again, it all depends where exactly we're going to place it. So yeah, let's just kind of finish on that note. So the last thing that we're going to talk about is like again, implication of those things, like understanding environment. It's again, it works with spatial limitations and with visibility of light. And understanding the types of light sources and choosing the certain type of light and depicting it visually in our work is going to help us to visually place them and visually understand how exactly those lights will behave. And this one small depiction, visual depiction, will help us to predict how light is going to behave and how light is going to interact with our subjects. So this is the reason why we basically created those. We need to do better work on working with a understandable and clear depictions of those light sources and truly understand how they will behave. So because of this, we need to study them. I guess I will go through a lot of tests outside of the streams inside of the Blender. Inside of the 3D software, I will create a lot of lighting conditions, and we're going to practically analyze those lighting conditions and come up with a better explanation, like visual representation, how those lights potentially could behave. And once this will done, we will proceed to practice. Unless we will find additional information that we could add before we will move forward. But again, I don't want to focus too much on theory right here. As you see, there's not that much of a theory right here. We have like 5 questions that we need to ask ourselves. We need like limited amount of instruments to work with, and the rest is just combining them together and like connecting them. That's it. And learning how to use them, how to analyze them. The rest is just a practice of like analyzing them and recreating certain conditions of lighting. So maybe we will add some more information, but for now it seems theoretically like more than enough, because when I established light sources for Angry Birds Resistance Transformers, in order to actually understand how to work with light, the only thing that I needed is to understand, like in terms of the understanding of the light, is what my primary light source and what exactly this primary light source is. Like my primary light source is a spotlight. It's a sun shines through the like the window or through the hole in a ceiling. My secondary light source was area light, which is basically an atmosphere. My tertiary light source was a point light, which is basically piles of fire, or on fire. I don't know. Yeah, piles on fire. yeah, so, and my additional lights were super weak point light, which basically worked like LED light, which basically affected only local areas and subjects. So again, my main light sources, primary, secondary, tertiary, affected everything around them, and my additional light sources was weak because they're affected only local areas and certain types, certain subjects. So I guess this is another thing that we could think about, like the other question, like it's more fit to the intensity of the light and the type of light. So the last thing that we're going to establish, I guess, is just something that I kind of figured out. Let's just add this one, is the overall effect of lighting. So this is the last thing that we're going to add as the information. And we're going to finish on that note. So so the effect on surroundings. So how exactly light is going to affect on surroundings? Like, it's just in basic two terms, not to complicate things. So effect on surroundings, and there's going to be two types of effect on surroundings. There's going to be a local. Let's just put local as the second one, and we need to come up with like overall, maybe on local, I don't know, like overall effect and local effect. So basically overall effect affects everything, around, like affects everything around. And local, it basically affects only how I established it right here, only local areas of subjects. So again, the example of the local effect of the light is basically our LED lights in Transformer's eyes. They're going to affect on the area of the Transformer's eye. It's not going to emit any light outside of this area, so it's going to be quite restricted in its weakness, because of its weakness. And most of our primary light sources are actually going to affect all surroundings. Not necessarily everything, but everything around this light source. So the closer things are to the light source, the more effect it has. And local, this is something that basically works in like only close to the subject itself. So it's more like, again, it's more like close to the overall intensity and spatial limitations. So it's kind of a, like, I don't know, mix between intensity and placement, like the understanding of effect on surroundings. So again, local, again, just restricted areas. Let's just, for now, set these two categories. So, yep, this is kind of it. So again, ideally we have 3 things to think about. First thing is an environment. Second thing is the types of light sources. And the third thing is the effect of these lights on surroundings. And these three things are, I guess for now, this is all information that we need. Maybe later we will add some more, but for now I guess this is it. So yeah, I guess this is it for today. My voice is kind of dying. I kind of want to sleep, so and I'm super tired and everything is aching. So yeah, the next stream, I don't know where exactly the next stream is going to be. It's definitely not going to be tomorrow. I'm not going to get rid of it, like remove it from the schedule, so maybe there is going to be a stream tomorrow, but I doubt this. So and if it's going to be, it's going to be in English. So hopefully next stream is going to be on this weekend, either on Saturday, on Sunday, most likely on Sunday. So I will try to stream at least twice a week on Sundays and Mondays for now, while I'm pretty sick and I need to get well, and I'm focusing on getting well. And because of this, I kind of want to stream less and work on practice more, and basically live life with less stress in order to heal properly. So because of this, basically, we're going to finish for the day. Thank you for watching. Thank you for being here. Have a nice day or night, and see you in the next session, which is again, it's going to be probably this Sunday, probably Sunday. So yep, see you there. Bye.